I am going to let our experts at Lake Waccamaw take it away, and I'm gonna start with my coworker Brian, who is with Fritz. Brian, are you still gonna say hello?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I want to make sure. I just wanted to give a brief introduction since today's program celebrates the unique nature of Lake Waccamaw as a rich ecological and cultural significance. I wanted to first say that we recognize the Waccamaw Siouan tribe, the people of the falling star, as the traditional caretakers of this land that we live and work and play on, and that we want to pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. And now I'd like for you to get a chance to meet our experts who are on the call, starting first with the man behind me in the water, and I'll let him start and then pass it on to the others.
Hi, everybody. My name is Fritz Rohde. I'm an ichthyologist with the National Marine Fisheries Service up in Beaufort. So I want to emphasize what I do here at the lake is totally on my own spare time, weekends and holidays, etc. I pay for it out of my pocket, so nothing to do with NOAA. Glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And then Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine DeVilbiss. I work in the Aquatic Wildlife Diversity Program with North Carolina Wildlife Resources, alongside my coworker Brina, you'll hear from in a second. We work with rare, threatened, and endangered freshwater species of mussel, fish, crayfish, and aquatic snails.
Awesome. And Brina. Hi, Brina.
Hi, this is Brina. As Catherine mentioned, the two of us work together at the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. I'm also a biologist there and coordinate our region. And I apologize, I don't have video today. I have slow rural internet, so you all just get to hear my interesting voice instead. Thank you. I'm going to do some introduction to Lake Waccamaw and the projects we have going on there. Before I start talking about Lake Waccamaw specifically, I wanted to introduce the program that I work as a part of, the Wildlife Diversity Program in the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. It's part of a national program funded through a federal grant that was passed by Congress and finalized in 2005. It requires all 50 states to write a document called a State Wildlife Action Plan, which allows us to define the natural resources communities that we have in North Carolina, both the habitats and our species, and lay out priorities for management actions that we'd like to take and for our partners to take as well. North Carolina was actually the first state in the nation to complete their action plan in 2005, and we update it every 5 years, and it helps guide our work across the state. These action plans cover both aquatic and terrestrial resources, and I focus specifically on our aquatic species. And this covers our non-game species of wildlife. So these are species that are not traditionally hunted or fished. And we focus particularly, as Catherine mentioned in her introduction, on our rare and endangered fauna. The goals of our program include conserving and enhancing habitats and communities, both wildlife communities and the human communities that rely on them. This helps improve our understanding of species diversity in North Carolina and enhance our ability to make decisions about how to manage those and how to share those with the citizens of North Carolina who own all of these resources. This also helps us foster partnerships both with conservation partners and with all of the residents of North Carolina that share these resources. We want to help support educational efforts such as this event that we are participating in today. And we also support and improve regulations and habitat protection programs, both existing ones and bringing new ones into being. So moving on to Lake Waccamaw specifically, to provide you a bit of background and help orient you, if you look at the map in the lower left portion of this slide, Lake Waccamaw is located in southeastern North Carolina in our coastal plain. It is in the Lumber River Basin, which is the shaded area outlined there. And the lake forms the headwaters of the Waccamaw River, which then flows through southeastern part of the Lumber River Basin and into South Carolina. It's a natural Carolina Bay lake, about 9,000 acres in size. There was a dam placed at the lower end of the lake where the Waccamaw River flows out. It was placed there to stabilize lake levels for residents and recreational users of the lake. The lake would still exist even if the dam wasn't there. The level would just change more often. There is a large amount of protected land around the lake. There's, of course, Lake Waccamaw State Park on the southeastern portion of the lake, which you can see there in the lower right corner. A part of the Columbus County Game Lands, which is property managed by the Wildlife Resources Commission. And there's also a dedicated nature preserve on the northwestern end of the lake by the Wildlife Commission boat ramp. I'm sorry, Zoom keeps closing itself on my computer to make life more interesting.
Oh.
I will try to remember what's on my slide while it reloads. What makes Lake Waccamaw unique is the fact that along the southeastern side of the lake in the state park, there is a large limestone outcrop. This limestone acts as a buffer for the water. Because of this unique set of species in the lake, the commission, in cooperation with state parks, performs monitoring annually for the suite of fish species in the lake. And then biennially, every other year, we do some monitoring surveys for mollusks in the lake. And this includes both freshwater mussels and snails. So I'm going to talk first briefly about freshwater mussels, and I'll follow that with some fish information. One of the things that makes freshwater mussels unique and fascinating is their life cycle, and most people aren't familiar with mussels, so I wanted to go over that briefly. Freshwater mussels require a fish host to complete their life cycle, and the way that works is the female mussel will often make a lure out of her own body tissue to attract a fish host in. And you can see that in the diagram. It looks like the mussel has a little fish sitting on top of it. That is actually a lure that the female mussel has made from her mantle tissue to look like a darter. And the motion of the water will make that move and be very attractive to something, say, like a largemouth bass, which you can see in this picture. When the fish comes in and tries to take a bite of this mussel lure, the mussel will release its larvae, which are called glaucidia, into the fish's face, and those larvae will snap shut on the fish's gill tissue and its fin tissue, where they will live as a parasite for a brief period of time, maybe a couple of weeks. This doesn't hurt the fish, and it provides the larvae, which are not fully developed and vulnerable, protection from the environment while they can get oxygen and food from the fish's circulatory system. When they're ready to transform into full-fledged juveniles, they just fall off the fish into whatever habitat that happens to be in. And as you can imagine, this is also a really important dispersal mechanism for mussels. If you imagine being a mussel and all you basically have are two shells and 1 foot, they're really poor swimmers and they can't run very fast. So it's hard for them to move around to different habitats. And by hitching a ride on a fish as a larvae, they can disperse across the landscape much more efficiently. As an example of what a freshwater mussel lure looks like, this is, you can go ahead and click on it to start the video. This is a video of a lure. The mussel is in the lower right-hand corner of the video, and it has made this little fish lure out of its body tissue. And when the water moves, will that video play?
No, it's not working. I think we'll have to imagine it. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, so just imagine that little fish rippling in the water current, just like a darter. And that, of course, will look very enticing to a bass. And you can see just inside the lure itself, there are some dark swollen areas. That's actually the mussel gill tissues full to bursting with little larval mussels that are ready to come out as soon as the fish nibbles on that.
This is just crazy.
They're amazing animals, and their lure variety is really wide. There are some that make something that looks like a full crayfish. They will swing it back and forth. They use different kinds of flashing colors and patterns. even within species, there may be different lures. So they're really amazing. Oh, and another thing I wanted to mention with that, different species of mussels require specific species of fish to complete their life cycle. So that's why it's really important to maintain native fish communities to then support our native mussel communities. If the Glaucidia, the larvae, gets on the wrong species of fish, that fish's immune system will kick that larvae off and it will not be able to successfully develop.
Wow.
So this is a list of the mussel species that we are targeting in our annual or biannual, monitoring in Lake Waccamaw. As you can see, mussels have some really fun names. One of my favorite is the rayed pink fat mucket. It does get quite fat for a mussel, and it does get very, very pink. Some of the big colorful adults will be hot pink. They're really beautiful animals. In addition, we have the yellow lamp mussel, the Savannah lilliput, and the eastern creek shell. You can see photos of those animals here. There were also two species that were originally thought to be endemic to the lake, and an endemic species is one that's found nowhere else in the world. So recently there was some genetic analysis into these two endemic species, and what was found was that they actually were not genetically distinct species, so their genes had not evolved to be separate enough from other animals to be true species on their own. They were instead lake forms of more widely distributed species. However, we still manage these populations in the lake as really important reservoirs of genetic diversity, and this gives these species a wider array of tools to adapt to changing conditions, such as we're seeing under climate change. It's just like if you have a toolbox with only one wrench in it, you're not going to be able to undo very many bolts. Whereas if you have lots of different sizes of wrenches, you have a better chance of fixing things. And genetics, in a broad sense, works in the same way. So this is an aerial view of Lake Waccamaw. And these are the three sites where we do our mussel sampling. We have two on the north side of the lake and one on the south side by the state park. These surveys are done via snorkeling. We have a big crew of folks go out there. And at each of these sites, we do 100 subsamples. And we collect all of the mussels that we can find, including digging into the sand to see who might be buried, because mussels are very good at hiding. And we identify all of them, we measure them, and then we're able to use that data to look into trends and a bunch of different statistics for the lake itself. As an example of the type of data that we are able to generate from this graph shows you the trend of mussel density across the whole lake. So this is averaging all of our sites together ever since we began this monitoring project in 2009. So across the bottom of the graph, you can see the years that we have done our monitoring. And then on the vertical axis, the y-axis on the side is the density of all mussel species combined. This is the number of mussels per meter squared, because that's how we measure our subsample areas. Over the years of our monitoring in general, the density averaged across the lake has been pretty consistent. Our overall average has been just over 31 mussels per square meter, which is a really, really high density. Lake Waccamaw is one of my favorite places to work, not just because it's beautiful, but because there's lots of animals to see there, which is something that is not always true in a lot of other places. In our most recent survey in 2019, we actually had a big upwards bump in our density, which of course is great to see. And looking at data like this, we also break it down on the individual species level and individual site level to help us understand how things may be changing, either for the better or for the worse over time. So moving on to the fish, these are the 4 fish species that we target in our annual monitoring. The first of these in the upper left-hand corner is the Waccamaw silverside. This is a species that is listed as threatened under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and it is also threatened at the state level. This is another endemic species found nowhere else in the world. It's only found in Lake Waccamaw and the upper part of the Waccamaw River and a few of the tributaries there. Another species is the broadtail mad tom. You're going to hear about that from Catherine and Fritz in more detail in a little bit. This is a species that has not yet gotten its official name. It is still going through what we call the description process, where there will be a full paper written, and Fritz is one of the folks working on that, and he'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. We also have the Waccamaw killifish, another endemic species to the lake and its tributaries, and the Waccamaw darter, and these are both species of concern at the federal level, and the Waccamaw darter is also a threatened species at the state level. So this is a aerial map again of the lake showing our fish sampling sites. We have 4 sampling sites for fish. We do those primarily by seining. We have, again, a big crew of people go out there every year, seine up fish. The exception is the Waccamaw darter, because they live in very thick vegetation that we can't pull a seine through without hating ourselves. So we do snorkeling surveys for the Waccamaw darter, and we just visually count the number of fish we see in a certain amount of time, because the lake water is generally very clear. And it's easy for us to see those guys in the shallow water. So this graph is an example of the results that we get from our fish surveys. This is our monitoring data for the Waccamaw silver side. Just like the mussels, the years of our monitoring survey is along the lower x-axis. On the left side, that y-axis is CPUE, stands for catch per unit effort. And that is simply the number of fish we catch for every minute of seining that we undergo. We also keep track of our temperature every year, because we have seen that fish move around. For example, you can see in 2016, the lake water got very hot. It got up to 37 degrees centigrade, which as a comparison, that is human body temperature. So that's almost 100-degree water. So as you would imagine, these fish moved out to deeper water where it was cooler, but it was harder for us to catch them there. So we didn't complete sampling that year, because it would have skewed our data and presented an inaccurate trend. So again, this is something that allows us to look at how fish populations change over time, but we also try to keep track of habitat variables that might influence that, such as temperature, so that we don't interpret them in a way that would not be appropriate. The one species we have not been able to locate in our monitoring is the broadtail mad tom. We have not seen any of them in either our seining or snorkel surveys. We even put some artificial reefs out there in the lake with some cinder blocks and pieces of PVC pipe trying to attract them. Haven't been able to find them, and they haven't been seen in the lake since 2002 up until recently, which you'll hear about in a minute. And so we were concerned about these guys, that they may have been extirpated from the lake, which means that they had vanished from there entirely. And so we started digging into this a little bit more deeply to try and figure out what might have happened with them and if they were indeed still there. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine DeVilbiss and let her tell you more about those efforts.
Thank you, Brina, for that excellent overview of the biologically unique Lake Waccamaw. And as mentioned, the broad-tailed mad tom is one fish that is found in Lake Waccamaw. It is the smallest member of the catfish family in North Carolina. The largest found has been about 2.5 inches, so very, very small catfish. They're federally listed as a species of concern. One second, there we go. There we go. And they're undescribed. They're yet to be named. This is showing the range of the broadtail mad tom. They are endemic, meaning that they are found only in this area in the world, in this grayed out area. And in Lake Waccamaw, which is this little cluster of red records here, they are genetically distinct in Lake Waccamaw within their range. Fritz Rohde, who you'll hear from in a minute, who, him and some of his colleagues are working to officially name these species. And he'll go into further detail about the genetics and the description. Previous survey efforts by Wildlife Resources Commission about 10 years ago, over 120 sites in the North Carolina portion of the range came up with just a few individual broadtail mad toms. I was able to get out last year in 2019 and survey a range of locations in their historical range via kick seining for broadtail madtom. And kick seining is using a net that's about 4 or 5 feet wide, and you place it downstream or down current, or if you're in a lake and there's no current, just to one side of preferred habitat. And for broadtail madtom, preferred habitat can be like a clump of leaves or a few sticks or even one stick. I have found a few under just one single stick. They like that cover, and one of us will go and kick up that habitat, and whoever may be in that gets lifted up into the water column and sent down into the kick seine. And in 2019, we did over 1,700 of these kick seines in the North Carolina portion of their range. And we found, out of 1,700 of these, we found 11 individual broadtail madtom. 2 of the 11, however, were in Lake Waccamaw, which was excellent. This is the first time they were found since 2002 in the lake, so it was excellent to see that they still are there, albeit in very low numbers. But this elusive, rare, very small member of the catfish family benefits from having cover to protect them from predation, from getting eaten by other creatures. And this is where the madtom motels come into play. These are small artificial cover structures that were first created by the then grad student Steve Midway from NCC. They're created using terracotta pots down here that are flipped upside down. We cut a little hole in them to make a door so that the little broadtails can swim in and take up residence, and it excludes larger fish, other things that may sort of be predators for the madtom, be it bluegill or largemouth bass or even turtles, so they can have a little safe haven. There are a few pictures of what the madtoms look like, and on the bottom right-hand corner is technician Austin Haney securing one of those newly deployed motels. You'll see these in action as Fred Reddy shows a demonstration of checking these madtom motels. But they have a weight that we put on the bottom to keep them more heavier, and we put a rebar that goes straight through the middle that secures them to the river or lake bottom. So right now we currently have 15 in Lake Waccamaw, which is down there, fishing, and there's 30 more madtom motels in the Lumber River and tributary creeks of the Lumber River. All of these are locations where broadtail madtom were found recently, like in the last 2 years. To date, with checking these motels, we have not found any broadtail madtom homes. However, we have found a number of other native creatures. There's a flat bullhead, tadpole madtom, and the Waccamaw crayfish, which is another endemic that only lives in this region. So that's excellent news to see that closely related species to the broadtail madtom are utilizing these structures and are finding them appealing. So maybe the broadtail madtom will find them appealing as well. And it's also great to see that other native and rare creatures are benefiting from having these structures out there too. So moving forward, we're in the process of assembling more of these motels, and we plan to deploy them in other historically occupied broadtail madtom areas. 2 examples would be in the Waccamaw River and in the South River, which is in the Cape Fear River Basin. And we'll just keep checking the ones that we do have out there and see who's home, and maybe we'll come across a broadtail madtom. And now I'm going to send it over to Fritz Reddy at Lake Waccamaw, and we'll see if anyone is home in any of those motels.
Well, hello. I'm standing here in the lake. It's a little bit deeper than the last time I was here, thanks to that rain we had the last couple of days. I first visited this lake 45 years ago, back in 1975, with 4 colleagues, grad school colleagues from UNC Chapel Hill. and to see the endemics that Brina talked about, and we did see them, good numbers. A few years later, researchers at UNC Wilmington were doing a survey of this lake to see what species were present. In doing so, they kept encountering a chubby mad tom with a rather large tail that they didn't know what it was. It wasn't the tadpole mad tom or the margin mad tom, which are the two most common mad toms in eastern North Carolina. So they got in touch with another ichthyologist, and he said, I collected something very similar in some tributaries of the Cape Fear River, but mine's more slender, but has some of the same pigment patterns, the same mouth shape, etc. So it became known as the broad-tailed mad tom, and a river form and a lake form, and it sort of languished there for way too many years. And in the 90s, I collaborated with a geneticist down in South Carolina on a bunch of projects, and one of his students took over looking at the genetics of the broad-tailed mad tom populations. And two surprises happened. One, we always thought that the closest relative to the broadtail was another speckled mad tom, a mad tom with speckles on it called the speckled mad tom in South Carolina. But based on genetics, its closest relative to the broadtail mad tom is the margin mad tom, which that was a big surprise for all of us. The other surprise was that there was no big difference between lake and river forms, but it was a basin form. The Cape Fear population is genetically distinct from the PD / lumber population, and there's one in the Edisto in South Carolina that's also distinct. So, and then the lake population is morphologically distinct from the lumber ones. It's chubbier, has different counts, fin rate counts, etc. So we're ending up with 4 distinct species that have been lumped under broadtail mad toms. And when we get our act together, once this COVID stuff gets past us, we're very close to having the manuscript ready to go. I keep coming back here to try to get a live one to get a much better photograph than what we already have. So that's one of my reasons. I've made 15 trips this year so far to this lake. I live in Wilmington, so it's only 45 minutes away, so not too bad. Historically, I would walk along the South Shore by the dam and look for submerged bottles or cans and empty them out, and let's see if I can find a mad tom in there. And I did it, you know, with pretty good regularity until 2002. But then I got in touch with Brina, and who convinced me to try these motels, and I convinced Brian to try some too. Currently, I'm standing on the North Shore, which is Brian's site. Mine is on the other side of the lake near the dam, where I have 11 of them out in some sort of secluded areas. And Brian checked them this morning and came up with 2 tadpole mad toms, which I don't know if you can see very well or not. And also he got a warmouth sunfish. In the past, we've gotten other species of sunfish as well as juvenile white catfish. So anyway, I have 3 motels out here I'm going to check, and the water is higher than I would like, so I may get a little wet without even falling in. Oh, look, she showed you the motel, but what I try to do is put my thumb over the hole so that they won't come squirting out when I'm pulling it up. But since it's a little deep. Well, you got those in pretty good, don't you, Brian? Oh.
How much deeper is it right now than normal levels?
Probably about 1 foot.
Wow.
We were out here this weekend, and it was quite pleasant. I went down my waders. I'll let you put that back on. I didn't sign up for this wet duty here. Okay, nothing in that one.
Carrie said it looks cold just watching. How is the weather? I mean, I'm sure the water is pretty cold.
It's about 68 degrees in the air, and the water's not bad. It's just wet.
Sounds pretty pleasant.
It's a lot more fun when it's warm.
I bet it's really refreshing when it's super warm outside and sunny. Brina said, I hate when the water is all wet.
Second one had nothing in it. I'm going to walk over to the third one, so I guess you can take questions if you want to try to do that.
Yeah, I was wondering, so the Mad Toms must be pretty small to be sitting in those motels. How big do they get? What's their biggest size?
Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay. The largest that's been found is 65 millimeters, which is about 2.5 inches. So pretty darn small.
That's cute. Are they good at swimming? It seems like their fins on the sides are like not as flat and wide as a lot of fish's fins. It seemed like they were more stick-like.
They do pretty good. They're not as flat as, say, like sculpin or other or goby, where those are designed. They've been genetically designed to stay on the bottom. Where broadtail madtom, they may spend a decent amount of time like under sticks and things on the bottom, but they are able to swim pretty good. I do realize I failed to mention that the two that were found in Lake Waccamaw last year were found by Dr. Derek Crane with Coastal Carolina University. So that was even more exciting because we weren't out sampling for them there, and it was just like, surprise, fantastic.
And Meredith had a great question. How are you able to find the motels? Are they marked?
Yes. So Fritz and Brian, they put theirs out. They kind of have a good idea of where they are with one coordinate. So they'll go to that coordinate, and then, yeah, they have an idea of where they are. Where I put mine out more in the river, we do use flagging on some of the bigger trees above the high water line. And we do have coordinates as well.
Gotcha. And is this something that the average person could do? You know, like if I felt like taking a little trip on the weekend, could I just make a little motel and go out there and drop it in?
Oh, I think Brina can answer that question. I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Oh, and Jackie is asking, is that a lake? And yes, Jackie, this is Lake Waccamaw, which is a Carolina Bay lake. It's shaped like an egg.
It is.
Go ahead.
Brina, was that you trying to talk?
No, I was going to ask, what was that question? I was typing the answer to a different question, so I missed it.
Oh, could anybody make a Mad Tom motel and then go put it in the lake?
So under the commission regulations, any type of trapping or animal catching device has to be labeled, and you need to have the appropriate license to deploy it. In addition, we have regulations that say for any of our state listed species, our species that are endangered, threatened, or special concern, you would need a special permit from the commission to handle them, just so that we make sure that those animals are handled with care and what's appropriate to them. However, we would like to have people get involved in our field efforts and help with projects like this. And so that is something that we are talking about in the future for citizen science projects, of doing things like Mad Tom motels, or we have some crayfish traps that would also be good candidates. And so once we are able to move beyond our COVID pandemic issues and we're able to interact more closely with people again, we'd love to have some training programs so that people could get involved and participate in activities like this, because it's absolutely something that anybody can help with, and we'd love for folks to be able to do that. because Catherine and I are just two people. We cover about 35 counties, and so we can always use some extra help. So the short answer is we hope coming soon when everybody can touch again.
That's awesome. And I'm going to check in with Fritz because it looks like you found something.
No, I found nothing.
Oh, no.
I just pulled the motels out because I was having trouble getting them up the rebars. So.
Gotcha. And there's some chatter in the chat about their sting. So John asked, how painful is their sting? And Brina has already answered. It's a little less, like it depends on the species. Some have a mild sting, like a bee sting. Some have a stronger sting. And I'm going to go ahead and ask Fritz, have you ever been stung by one?
Yes. Many, not so much the tadpole mad tom and broadtail, they have really short spines, but the margin mad tom, which is very common in the Piedmont streams, I have gotten nailed dozens of times by them.
Mm.
But
does it hurt just as much as the last time, every time it happens?
Yeah, it hurts every time. What I try to do is squeeze my blood out fast as I can. But you know, it's all how you really don't pick them up like this. You cup them in your hand so you don't get stabbed. The problem I had, we were getting so many up in the Dan River up in Stokes County that I couldn't avoid getting stuck by them.
And how do they make their venom? Like, is it something that they make naturally, or do they feed on something that's venomous and then create their own venom from that?
Oh, they have a gland at the base of their spines that produces it. And all the different mad toms, I think Brina must have said this, all mad toms have some kind of venom. Some are just stronger than the others. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and Carrie mentioned that's a good problem to have, maybe, where you have so many mad toms that it's impossible to not get stung.
Yeah, well, once upon a time I had a wife who went with me, and she was trying to show off to some students. She reached in there and she got nailed underneath her fingernail, and that was very, very, very painful.
That sounds like the worst place to get stung. One of the worst. Oof. All right, just a reminder, if y'all have any questions, you can type them into the chat and let us know. I think it looks like fun walking around a lake.
Well, it is until you stumble over a cypress knee.
Oh, yeah. Can you remind us what is in the jar that you're holding up?
That is a tadpole mad tom.
Nice.
That's about the size. That's about the biggest size you'll see for a broadtail.
Wow.
I think Catherine probably mentioned it, but they are the smallest mad tom in this state, and one of the two smallest mad toms in the United States.
And let's see, Meredith wants to know, how do you select the sampling sites?
Yes. No, for my site that I have on the South Shore by the dam, that's where I historically have walked back and forth, and that's why I found them. So I tried to set two different types. One was more of a muddy bottom, very secluded, and the other one is much more open, sandy bottom.
And Margaret asks, does the lake have eutrophication issues?
Well, I mean, Brina could probably answer that too, but I've been here some years in late summer, and there's been some really nasty algae that gets washed up on the shore.
A little, yeah. So I'll say it does have some eutrophication issues, but not as much as, say, some of the other reservoirs in the state, like Jordan Lake or Falls Lake.
Meredith said, you've got to think like a mad tom to find good sampling sites.
Yes, channel the inner mad tom.
I have to say, I love the name Mad Tom, and then the fact that you call them Mad Tom motels, because it almost sounds like it's, I don't know, like a bachelor who's, you know, just doing whatever it wants. I don't know. That's me anthropomorphizing them.
Well, when it's Derek Crane from Coastal Carolina got those two last year, they got one with the seine, but the other one of his students picked up an empty mussel shell, and the fish flopped out of the mussel shell, and she scooped it up.
Oh, wow.
And Fritz, if I remember correctly, you found some Mad Tom eggs in some of the motels, didn't you?
Yeah. I've tried all kinds of. I put tiles out here. I've, like I said, emptied bottles. Tried everything to try to find these guys again.
Is there a big difference between the male and female Mad Toms?
You can only tell them apart when she's full of eggs.
Oh, okay. How many eggs do they usually have at a time?
Ooh.
Enough to notice a difference.
Well, I mean, when UNCW folks were doing the work out here in the late 70s, they preserved a good number of egg nests. And I'm just going to guess maybe 30 or 40 eggs. It's not a lot.
That's, I mean, you know, it's all relative, right? That's a lot compared to people. But for fish, yeah, I mean, I've heard of them laying like thousands at a time.
Right.
What animals feed on the Mad Toms?
Larger catfishes. There have been reports of flathead catfish in this lake, but
They're not native.
no, they're invasive. Bass, largemouth bass could be eating them, but they're probably mostly nocturnal to avoid being eaten.
Right.
And they do have the spines, which help.
Yeah. All right. Well, feel free to type in any questions if you have them, but we are almost out of time. So I'll go ahead and thank you all again, Brina, Catherine, Fritz, and Brian for being here and for being our experts on Lake Waccamaw. And I loved watching you search for the Mad Toms. Sorry you had to handle the kind of flooded lake. And thank you all for coming to the program. We'll put a link to a survey in the chat. Carrie just threw it in there. Thank you to our members who support us every day. And of course, thank you to our sponsors for Darwin Days. We've got an anonymous donor and Syngenta that helped make this program happen. So yeah, thank you all. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very fun.